I'm super excited today to be joined by Katie Gilbert, who is an expert climate communicator, and that is just what we need for today's conversation. Katie, could you kick us off with an intro on yourself?
Yes, thank you, Mel. I'm excited to be here with you today. Yes, I am a climate communicator at this point. I've worked for about 20 years as a freelance journalist, editor, ghostwriter, many ways of communicating. I'm especially into translating technical, difficult to understand information for the layperson to make it accessible, and I've gotten especially interested in doing that in the climate space. I think one of the reasons is because when I did my MFA in nonfiction writing about 10 years ago, I got really, really interested in economic systems and how people are talking about the ways they could be reformed or reimagined to better support the climate. And a lot of people see this as a very technical, difficult to understand conversation, but it's an important one and we all have a part in it. I remember learning that eco, the prefix for both ecology and economy, comes from the Greek word oikos, which means home or place where we live. And then nomi for economy means management of. So these are worlds and systems that we live within, and we need to be talking more about how to better manage, better steward our lives to live within a sustainable future.
I agree, and I learned something new today. So thanks for that Greek lesson. I think that you really hit the nail on the head because so much about raising climate awareness is making it inclusive and accessible because I do think that these terms can be so complex and scare people away when in reality they can be digestible if the right people break them down to bite-sized parts. And so thinking about that intersection of ecology and economy, I'm so excited to debunk some economy, climate topics today. And so maybe to kick us off, could you define climate capitalism?
Climate capitalism is a term that was popularized in a book by that name by Akshat Rathi, who's a reporter and a writer. Basically, the argument of climate capitalism is that our dominant economic system rules and incentives can be arrayed toward protecting the environment rather than destroying it. So it becomes more profitable to protect it, to get to a zero emissions future, than to continue destruction. Critiques of climate capitalism, of course, basically the idea that endless growth, the drive for profit, ongoing competition are built into a capitalist system and that those are incompatible with long-term ecological health.
Yeah. Okay. And if we think about that from a more community or social lens, what does eco-socialism mean?
Right, and this is a good transition, Mel, because an eco-socialist would take a lot of issue with climate capitalism and argue that what we need is not reform, but really a reimagining of some of the root systems of the economic and ownership systems that we live within. And eco-socialism would say that we really need much more of a focus on collective ownership, collective decision making, and that many of the key parts of our society, energy, housing, industry, should be democratically owned and operated.
Uh, a lot of what you're talking about kind of makes me think about social justice ideologies or climate justice or places where everyone has a seat at the table and it's really a collective community conversation. So it makes me want to ask you, what do we mean when we talk about a just transition?
Right, also core here, and something that eco-socialists point to a lot, that it's likely going to be kind of a painful or bumpy transition to get from something like the capitalism we live within today to something even more like eco-socialism, and it must include a just transition. For example, for workers, think about, at the center of this, workers in the fossil fuel economy right now. A just transition would argue that there should be guaranteed retraining and high quality jobs within the new energy infrastructure available to these people who will be moving out of the old way of doing things. But the just transition also extends to communities. So safety nets guaranteed to communities who also stand to lose or bear the brunt of some of the hardest parts of the transition that we need to go through.
Okay, I'm tracking. I hear you. And if we think about having everyone in, what do we mean when we say that?
Yes, that's often brought up by eco-socialists, acknowledging that such a dramatic transition to a different way of owning and governing our society will have some bumpy parts, and some people will be kind of shunted out of the lives or jobs that they've been used to. So a just transition is necessary to, for example, for workers guarantee retraining into good jobs, for example, within the renewable energy economy.
Absolutely. Okay, and you brought up economy. So one thing I wanted to ask you is, what do we mean when we say extractive economy, which I believe would represent likely what we're in today?
Yes.
And maybe there's an opportunity to move towards a more generative economy. But could you talk to us about what each of those means?
Yes, so I'm most familiar with these terms. I've got another book here. Marjorie Kelly is a researcher and writer who's written about this distinction. And that's exactly right, that an extractive economy is the one that we're familiar with. We can see how this plays out when the interests of a few lead toward a motivation to increase profits, maximize profits at the expense of many, human life and life beyond humans. And a more generative economy would be designed to allow life to thrive. So Marjorie Kelly in this book writes a lot. She takes a very story-based approach to what this can look like, what the difference looks like. She points to cooperative ownership. Cooperatively owned businesses are more likely to be generative for the people working within them, for the communities that host them. She talks about community banks and credit unions. I mean, a lot of these models exist in our communities right now, and it's easy to overlook them. But there are, for example, banking models out there that are meant to be more generative than purely extractive and profit focused.
Yeah, it's funny that you bring these up because I realize in my town actually has a credit union and I overlook it because it's something that's not even on my radar to consider. And I think that there's a lot of opportunities for us to be in more of a participatory or contributory economy. And this makes me think of a book that I think we both recently read called The Serviceberry by Robin Wall Kimmerer, who's famous for her other book, Braiding Sweetgrass. But it really talks about the gift economy and the idea that not everything needs to be transactional, but there's an opportunity for reciprocity and looking at nature and giving back in ways that are positive for all. And I bring this up because I think that the gifts of knowledge that you've bestowed on us today are very meaningful. And I want to thank you for helping to kind of debunk these terms to make them more approachable for more people.
My pleasure. This was a lot of fun. Thanks for having me, Mel.